Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have the possibility to address you, although I'm very sorry that I couldn't attend this important conference. As you may know, I've been working in the subject of measuring well-being for a while, especially when I was the chief statistician of the OECD. I launched the global project on measuring the progress of societies, which is directly linked to the measurement of well-being. What is well-being? What does it mean? How can we define it? Over the last decades, several attempts were made to try to define what well-being means. And we can go from the more classical economic definitions, which are mainly linked to income or wealth, and of course the capability of people to spend the money that they receive. But this perception of well-being as a purely economic, in fact, more and more with initiatives taken by the OECD, by UN, by others, we go beyond the GDP, for example, as measure of well-being, economic well-being at national level, or beyond GDP per capita, which is another very often used measure of relative performance of different countries. Now we agreed that we want to go beyond GDP, and therefore to do that we have three main possibilities. The first one is to extend classical national account systems in order to include other dimensions like the social one or the environmental one. This is a very interesting way of measuring, but of course it needs time, it needs a lot of resources. You have to build environmental accounts, you have to build social account matrices, and this is a very costly exercise. The second possibility is to try to compile composite indicators. In other words, taking data about the economic, the social, and environmental dimensions, like the Human Development Index does, and through statistical techniques, you can build a composite indicator through which you can do rankings, for example, or also evaluate the progress over time of a particular country or region, of course. This system, which looks very interesting and is very much appreciated by media especially, because they can do rankings and say, well, this country increased by, compared to last year, by 5 positions, or the other one is worsening its position. In particular, the methodological dimension of composite indicators has been addressed in a handbook that we published at the OECD a few years ago. But the key point here is that when you have negative correlations, let's say trade-offs, between one dimension and the other dimension, you may have the overall composite indicator which is stable, although its components change very much. For example, you may have a crisis like the crisis that we are having currently in Europe, but at the same time the energy consumption and the pollution is going down. So you would say, well, the situation is improving from an environmental point of view, but is worsening from an economic point of view. Therefore, the overall index may stay stable, but this is not very informative. And especially, the other question is who is going to choose the indicators that should be included in the composite indicator. This is something that I will address in a second. The third possibility is to recognize that the complexity is a real issue, and therefore, instead of having a single indicator that can encompass the overall dimensions of well-being, we should recognize this and have different dimensions, different indicators for each dimension, which would, in a sense, give a more comprehensive picture of what's going on. Of course, the two questions in this case are, first, who chooses the indicators, and second, how can you communicate this to the public? And of course, these two issues can be addressed in several ways. In particular, the choice of indicators, in order to make this set of indicators fully accountable, fully legitimate in a democratic dimension point of view, you should involve people, or at least representatives of different components of the society. The other point, which is the communication, is an issue, is a challenge, because of course everybody likes to look at one single number to say this is improved or worsened over the last few years, while if you have 10 indicators or 100 indicators, you always find some indicators that are going up, others that are going down, so it's very difficult to have a conclusion about this. Now, at international level, all these three different developments are being followed. As I said, the national accounts are being developed. The UN Statistical Commission in March decided to adopt as a standard the environmental account system integrated with the economic one. But now, of course, this new system has to be implemented by countries. The second stream of work, the composite indicators, have been developed by several institutions, and especially the Human Development Report includes more and more indicators of this type in order to augment, to extend the classical Human Development Index to include also other dimensions. And the third one, the approach based on sets of indicators, is being used by several countries. Now, let me give you my personal interpretation of what well-being is and the way in which the OECD has developed, for example, its framework, which is based on the concept of equitable and sustainable well-being. In other words, well-being has to deal with economic dimensions like income, but also health, education, interpersonal relations, environment, political voice. All these elements have been identified also by the so-called Stiglitz Commission's report that are very important to people. But then we have to consider two cross-cutting issues. The first one is the inequality within today's generation, which is the income distribution, and the other one is inequality over time, which means sustainability. In this way, having this concept of equitable and sustainable well-being, we encompass all these dimensions and can provide a good sense of whether a particular country or region moves forward or backward. Of course, as you know, as I said, also, this is not an easy process. In Italy, for example, we have developed a process engaging the Economic and Social Council, which is a constitutional body with which we have developed a framework. We have chosen now the indicators, and at the end of this year, the first report on the progress of Italy will be published. But there are other countries, like, for example, Canada, which has developed a different approach. The Canadian Index of Well-being is now a well-established project with this composite indicator, and its components have been chosen by the organizers of this initiative through a wide consultation with the civil society and citizens. If you want to know more about all these developments, you can visit www.wikiprogress.org, which has been developed by this global project of measuring progress and makes reference to a lot of initiatives around the world. So in conclusion, I think that this is a must for policymakers, but also for a society to understand whether the current policies are the right ones and the future policies, what kind of issues have to address. There is an issue of accountability of policymakers vis-à-vis citizens. Citizens, when they vote, should know more about what happened, and statistical indicators can help in this respect. And the third point is this element of legitimacy. The whole society has to be involved in this discussion, because at the end, talking about indicators is a way to talk about the final objectives of a society, and this is most important, especially in this particular moment in which the crisis, the global crisis, are asking us to develop a new conceptual framework, new paradigms for economic and social policy. So I welcome very much the opportunity to address you in this seminar, and I look forward to seeing your deliberations in order to discover what your country is planning to do. As I said, there is an international network that you can benefit from, and I'm sure that maybe at the next World Forum on Statistics, Knowledge and Policy that the OECD will organize in New Delhi in India in October, also your experiences could be presented. Thank you very much.